Hi guys, this is Mrs. Hallman, and we're going to be going over the nervous system for Anatomy and Physiology 1. So to get started for today, we're going to go over what the nervous system actually is. The nervous system includes the brain, the spinal cord, and then all of the nerves that are in our body. So the brain, the spinal cord, and then any of the nerves that are in our body. To learn about the nervous system, a lot of times we will investigate what happens when there's injury to the nervous system. So before we get started and jump into it, consider what it means to be truly brain dead. It can mean a couple of things. It can mean, is your brain itself the only thing that's not functioning? It can mean perhaps your brain is working, but incoming signals to your brain is not. Maybe it means your brain is working, but your nerves and your spinal cord are not. So to investigate that, there's an article in NIH that was published in 2009 that defines being brain dead as having absolutely no brain function and having no function of the spinal cord or nerves, meaning that that person is in a coma, is unable to have any brainstem reflexes, and has complete apnea, which means they are not able to breathe or to move their body at all on their own. So that's what being brain dead actually means. What we're going to be covering in this unit of anatomy is the two divisions of the nervous system. The first division of the nervous system is called the central nervous system, or the CNS. The central nervous system only includes the brain and the spinal cord, named after the fact that both the brain and the spinal cord run through the center of our body. The second part of the nervous system is called the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. The peripheral nervous system contains all of the nerves and all of the ganglia, which are collections of nerves that run through our body. So the PNS consists of 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So you can see those in red up here. And then 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which are also in red, but those are the ones that connect directly to parts of our brain. If you're going into nursing in your future, you'll definitely have to know the names of all of these nerves. So good luck. When we talk about the basic function of our nervous system, before we get into the specifics, we essentially can summarize it as coordinating the body's systems by receiving and sending information. This is to help our body maintain homeostasis. So a great example of this is perhaps you are looking at a glass of water and your brain recognizes that water because you have a sense of sight that's going to see the glass of water. That sense of sight is going to be a sensory neuron that's going to send that input to your brain. Whenever we send something towards our brain, we say that it is an afferent signal, afferent with an A. So we can remember afferent comes at your brain, at afferent. That afferent signal is going to come to your brain, and we're going to have a step called integration. Your brain is going to see that signal coming in or process that signal coming in, and it's going to make a decision. So perhaps your brain is going to say, I see that glass of water, and I actually think that our body needs some water now. We're a little bit dehydrated. So it's going to make a decision. It's going to integrate, and it's going to respond with an action. Sometimes that action is for a gland. In this specific case, it's an action that's being sent through a motor muscle. So that signal from our brain is going to send an output, and that motor output is going to connect to a muscle so that we can pick up the glass of water and drink it. That output set signal is called an efferent signal, efferent with an E. I remember efferent is the effect that the brain has, right? So afferent goes to the brain, we integrate, and then we have an efferent signal that comes out. That motor signal typically is going to help us respond to the signal and maintain homeostasis. So that's the nervous system in a nutshell. We, of course, are going to get into the nitty gritty and the beautiful process in which this actually works. So how this actually works, right? So this is the basic overview of the nervous system. And what we're going to see is that our entire nervous system is divided into two overall categories, our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. If you're a student in my class and you're taking notes, I would definitely pause the video at this point and take time on your piece of paper to write down this overall flow. We will then go over each of these boxes and talk about how it's organized. Okay, so if you've written down this overall flow, let's kind of break it down. Our overall nervous system is broken down into our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system, right? Our central nervous system is going to be just our brain and spinal cord, and we'll go over essentially what makes that up when we talk about the actual nerves themselves or the actual tissue in those brain and spinal cord together. But right now, let's look at the peripheral nervous system. peripheral nervous system leans to the edges, right? The peripheral vision that you have is the vision on the side. So peripheral means outsides, right? Our peripheral nervous system is divided into our autonomic nervous system and our somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, you can see it says here, communicates with our internal organs and glands. Our somatic nervous system is going to communicate with sense organs, and voluntary muscles. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. The somatic nervous system is going to consist of our sensory and our motor nervous systems. Our somatic nervous system, somatic means body, is basically anything that is coming into our body and out of our body. So that could be senses coming in and movements that are coming as a result of those senses. So our sensory nervous system is going to be an afferent nervous system. Think of that as your five senses. So your sight, your hearing, your smelling, your taste, and your touch. Those senses are coming towards your brain. They're afferent. They're coming to your brain. The motor nervous system is going to be your output. So how we respond to those senses coming in. It's going to be the efferent, or things going away, or the effect from your brain. The motor nervous system is going to largely control your skeletal muscles. So it's going to help you move those muscles. So let's go through a quick example. Maybe you are walking through a high school hallway and you smell a disgusting smell. Maybe it's in the science wing and they're dissecting cats. Maybe. You smell that smell. Your body is able to take that signal into your brain. Your brain integrates it, thinks about it, and then has a motor response. Maybe that motor response is you make a face or you plug your nose, right? That would be your motor output. That's a good example of how your somatic nervous system can have an input and an output, okay? The next branch of our nervous system is called the autonomic nervous system. The word autonomic means automatic, right? Kind of sounds like that. And that's going to be the part of our nervous system that is not underneath conscious control. So our autonomic nervous system is going to communicate with internal organs and glands, but we don't really think about it, right? And it's a good thing we don't, because it would be exhausting if every single day you had to think and make a conscious choice to beat your heart, right? So I'd be sitting here and I'd be like, beat, 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 beat. But then I'd also have to be thinking about moving my diaphragm so that I could breathe and take in air and oxygen. So I'd be thinking, beat my heart, breathe, beat my heart, breathe, beat my heart, breathe. But then at the same time, I'd have to be thinking about blinking my eyes, right? So I'd be sitting here and thinking, beat my heart, breathe, blink, beat my heart, breathe, blink. And at the same time, I'd have to be thinking about secreting enzymes into my digestive system, or maybe moving the food that I just ate for breakfast through my digestive system. There's a lot happening behind the scenes that needs to be happening automatically so that we are freed up to think about our conscious thought. Like, what is my anatomy teacher talking about and teaching right now? Or what do I need to do for homework tonight? Or what do I need to do to drive my car down the road safely? So our brain needs to think about our conscious thought. So our autonomic nervous system will take over the rest, which is great. When we break our autonomic nervous system down, we break it into two different categories. We have our sympathetic division and our parasympathetic division. Our sympathetic division is our arousing division. So that basically means it's the part of our nervous system that is going to amp us up. It's going to energize us. It's going to put us into alert mode. The sympathetic nervous system is really our fight, flight, or freeze nervous system, where it basically means we need to respond to whatever input is coming in. All right. It's going to gear us up, and our sympathetic nervous system is going to choose to send blood to any area that needs to be activated. Right. The opposite of that is our parasympathetic nervous system. I always remember our sympathetic nervous system is calming. We're trying to nurture and calm somebody down. So I think of like sitting down my friend who might be very, very anxious, and I'm trying to calm them down. And I put my hand on their shoulder and I say, hey, there, para, calm down, para, it's going to be okay. Your parasympathetic nervous system is going to be the one that calms us down. That's our rest and digest nervous system. We're going to rest. We're going to calm down our bodies. We're going to rest. We're going to focus on digestion, not running around. Okay. So those are the two divisions of our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system. This image is really interesting because it basically looks at all of the different parts of our body and whether or not they are underneath sympathetic nervous system in blue or parasympathetic nervous system in red. Remember, sympathetic is going to be when we're stressed out. Parasympathetic is going to be when we're relaxed. All right, so think about on the blue side of our body. Think about what would happen if there was a saber-toothed tiger that jumped out and was about ready to rip out your throat. All right, hopefully not. But in that situation, we would want to make sure that we are able to run away quickly and make very fast decisions to move ourselves away from harm. If you think about what's needed in that scenario, we need to have good vision, right? We need to see where the danger is and run away from it. So our pupils are actually going to dilate. We're going to bring in more bring in more light so that we can see more images, so that we can see more detail and make a choice about where we need to go for safety. We're going to actually inhibit, meaning we're going to stop anything that has to do with digestion. When you're running away from a tiger, it's not necessary for you to focus on digesting whatever you had for breakfast. You need to get out of there. You need to protect yourself. So we are going to turn off salivation. We're going to turn off digestion. We're going to turn off anything that has to do with us digesting inside of our gastrointestinal tract. We're going to turn on bronchial dilation. So bronchial are the tubes inside of your lungs that are going to bring in oxygen, and we're going to dilate them, which means we're going to take that tube and make it wider. If we make your lung tubes wider, it means we can get more oxygen to your lungs, which means we can get more oxygen to the rest of your body. We're also going to trigger your liver to break down and release more glucose. Glucose equals energy, right? So if we're running away from a tiger, we need a quick burst of energy in order to run away from them fast. Our kidneys are going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are basically our adrenaline response. So it's going to give us a burst of energy, quick focus so that we can make some decisions to run away from that tiger. It's going to release sweat so we can stay cool. And it's going to make sure that everything that's not in our digestive system is going to be prepped and ready to go. Over on the parasympathetic nervous system side, we're going to look at what would happen if we escaped the tiger. We built a fence around our home. We're inside of our house. It's the end of the night. We have a full belly of food. We're getting ready for sleep, right? This is going to be when we start to turn off our fight or flight and freeze, and we're going to turn on our rest and our digest. So everything that we kind of amped up, we're going to try to slow down, right? We're going to focus on digestion and repairing our body tissues. So instead of having our pupils big to bring in more light so we can see, we're going to relax and contract our pupils. So your vision's going to go a little bit more calm and fuzzy. We're going to stimulate salivation. So we're going to start making saliva so we can digest what we ate. We're going to constrict our bronchiole, which is going to slow our breathing. And if you're seated and you're laying down at night, your breathing rate is going to slow up. There's no need for as much oxygen. We're going to stimulate digestion, which means that we're going to slowly start releasing things from our gallbladder, from our pancreas, from our liver to help us digest the food that we ate through our day. We're going to relax everything so we really can just focus on resting and repairing the tissues that we used really hard during that day. At any given point in any given day, our bodies are constantly fighting or switching between sympathetic and parasympathetic. You can kind of think of it as like a tug of war within your nervous system. The sympathetic is going to take over and be winning that tug of war whenever you're at really high periods of stress, whereas the parasympathetic is going to take over whenever you're in a point in your day where you're kind of more relaxed. The key part of this is that we are healthiest when we have an equal division of labor. We don't want our body to constantly be operating in the sympathetic world. That means that whenever we stress ourselves out 24/7, we're not going to be healthy. We need, and it's very valuable to have those times in our day where we are operating in our parasympathetic nervous system. That gives our body a chance to process the food that we took in. It gives our body a chance to heal any injury to tissues that we may have experienced. It gives us a chance to focus on our body and to rest. And rest is very important. So a healthy body is one that goes between these two nervous systems throughout our day. Right? When we compare the somatic versus the autonomic, so again, a reminder, somatic is going to be a body cell that has to do with the input of sensory information and the output of motor information, compared to our autonomic division, which is going to be our fight or flight or our rest and digest. So in the top of this image, you can see that our somatic nervous system is going to be a direct connection. So typically when we're talking about our body communicating with our muscles, it's going to be a nerve that starts in our spinal cord and directly connects to our muscle. If you are in my anatomy class, we just got done our muscular system unit where we learned about this neuromuscular junction and how the nervous system communicates with the muscle. If you look at the bottom image, we can see that the autonomic nervous system is a little bit more complex. The autonomic nervous system usually isn't a direct connection because typically the autonomic nervous system is not talking to just one muscle or one spot. The autonomic nervous system, our fight or flight or rest or digest, is going to have widespread effects. So instead of having it just communicate through one neuron to one muscle, a lot of times it will communicate to a gland or some effector. So in this image, you can see that the preganglionic neuron, which is just another name for the neuron that comes before the ganglia, is going to communicate with another neuron. And then that other neuron might communicate with either a gland, which are those green little cells there, maybe a spindle cell that is found in our smooth muscle tissue. So think like maybe our digestive tract to create peristalsis to help us digest, or maybe it's going to affect like our heart. So that's going to be that branching muscle cell that you see there. So maybe it's going to affect our heart rate increasing, right? So somatic versus autonomic nervous system, the structure is going to largely dictate the function, okay? If we move on, we can compare the actual results of those. So on the top view here, you see your peripheral nervous system, which is going to be your somatic nervous system that is going to have one neuron connecting to one thing like skeletal muscle. It's largely going to be a stimulation that is connected with only one neurotransmitter. If we go down here to our autonomic nervous system, here's our sympathetic, which if you think about it, sympathetic is that rest or digest, or is that fight or flight? Sympathetic is fight or flight. All right, so that's going to be communicating either neuron to neuron or perhaps neuron to gland. So this is an example of our adrenal gland, which is going to secrete epinephrine or norepinephrine, which is going to kind of amp us up for that response. All right, and that sympathetic response is either going to stimulate these organs or glands, these effector structures, or it's going to inhibit them based on what we need. The parasympathetic neurons are going to communicate that inhibitory effect. So they're going to kind of calm us down, okay? As we break down the nervous system, right, we've already talked about the divisions of each of our nervous systems, but we can see common cells in all of them. We're going to focus on 4 main types of cells, but know that if you go into neurology or if you go into any branch that has to do with neurology, you're going to learn there are actually many more. So we kind of simplify them a little bit. The first type of cells are probably the types of cells that you've heard about before using your nerve when you talk about your nervous system, and those are called neurons. Neurons are essentially the main key player cells of our nervous system. And I will say this neuron that you see on your screen is not the only form of this neuron. Some neurons have these long strands coming out of them on either side. This is what we call like a typical neuron, very cliche type of neuron. So the first part up here labeled number 1 is called the cell body. And that cell body is going to contain anything within the cell that needs to function for its normal cell function. So think about the things you learned in your freshman year bio, like it's going to have the mitochondria, the nucleus, the Golgi body, the ER, the ribosome. So that cell body is going to be the main portion of the cell that does all of the cell's life functions. Coming out from that main cell body are these short appendages. These short appendages that kind of look like spikes and they're labeled number 2 are called dendrites. These dendrites essentially are going to be connections that are going to receive information from any other neuron that's close by. Their job is to pick up signals from another neuron. Connected to that cell body also is going to be this long strand called an axon, right? A long strand called an axon. Notice that on that axon that shoots away from that cell body, there are these white blobs that are kind of connecting on that axon. We're going to go over what they are in a moment. And then at the end of the axon, you can see these little kind of buttons at the end. We call these synaptic buttons. Sometimes you can call them presynaptic terminals. These are going to essentially be where the neuron connects to another neuron or another type of effector, like a muscle or a gland. Okay, so that's our basic format of a neuron. There are 4 types of neuroglial cells. So these are support cells. And I say there's 4 types, but really there's 3 types. And the one type just has 2 names, which is confusing, but we will work it out together. So here we have our neuron. If you notice, the color of the neuron is yellow. So the neuron, you can see that same cell body here labeled. You can see the dendrites. You can see that long axon. You can see the axon terminal, which means the end of the axon. you can see there are cells that are surrounding and wrapping themselves around the cell. So we're going to focus just on a couple of these. We're going to focus on astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, otherwise known as Schwann cells, and microglial cells. Okay, so let's focus on those together. These microglial cells are the first ones we're going to focus on. So those are these green cells right here that I'm circling. So the light kind of turquoisey green cells. These are microglial cells. And the function of microglial cells is that they are going to help with the immune system inside of our brain. Our brain is very closed off. Our nervous system is very protected. We have a blood-brain barrier that's not going to allow the normal blood that's going through the rest of our body and might be exposed to things to get into our brain. Our brain is too precious, right? So our immune cells can't function the same way they function throughout the rest of our body. So we need our own immune system in our brain. And these microglial cells are going to do that. Their main job is to clean up the area around the neuron. They're trying to keep that neuron functioning well. So their main job is to essentially suck up anything that might be bad that got into our nervous system. They will process it, break it down, send it back into the blood, get it out of our brain. All right, so those microglial cells will support the neuron by cleaning up the area and helping the immune function. Okay, the second type are called astrocytes. Now, if you are nerdy like I am and you break words down to find their meaning, the word astro means star. And astrocytes really do look like stars. So I'm going to zip back to that original image. The astrocytes are these red cells here. And you'll notice they kind of have their little hands on the neuron, but then they're also sticking off of it. And they really do look like little stars. Astrocytes' main job are to bridge the gap between a neuron and the blood vessel. Okay, to bridge the gap between the neuron and the blood vessel. Here's the reason why. Our neurons need blood because they need what's carried in blood. Blood carries oxygen and glucose so that we can do things within our body. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, our blood is also exposed to anything that we have absorbed that's not great. So it would be pretty bad news if we absorbed something that was toxic and it went directly to our brain and it killed off our neurons. One of the things about neurons that's not so great is that they can never heal and they can never, well, they can heal. They can never reproduce, meaning if we damage an entire neuron, we can't make a copy of it to replace it. It's dead forever. So what the astrocytes do are they connect the blood vessels to the neuron. I like to think that astrocytes are very sacrificial. They're like the taste tester for the king who tastes all the food coming in so that if anything's poisoned, they die before the king does, right? Our astrocytes are the go-between between our neuron and the blood vessels. So what they will essentially do is take all the good stuff, the oxygen and the glucose, and they will deliver it to the neuron. They will take all the waste from the neuron, so the CO2 and any waste products from the cell, and they will put it back into the blood. But if there's anything that's toxic in our blood that's not going to be great, what will happen is the blood will kill off the astrocyte, which can easily be replaced and healed before it will affect the neuron. So the astrocytes are really important to keeping our neurons healthy. The last division of brain support cells are called oligodendrocytes. And oligodendrocytes essentially are what provide insulation for our neuron. So in this image, you can see that kind of lime green looking cell, and you can see that it is essentially wrapping itself around the axon of the neuron. So they will wrap themselves around the axons and the neurons, but oligodendrocytes are only found in the central nervous system. So I'm going to jump back to the original picture. Can you guys see the blue cell that has its little appendages that are wrapping around? It kind of looks like a hot dog roll around a hot dog. They're wrapping around the axon of that neuron. Those oligodendrocytes are found in the central nervous system. And guys, as soon as we cross over into the peripheral nervous system, they are now called something different. They are exactly the same. It's just when they're in the central nervous system, they're called oligodendrocytes. When they're in the peripheral nervous system, they're called Schwann cells. So believe it or not, the scientist that discovered them in the peripheral nervous system, Mr. Schwann, named them after himself, and that name has persisted. But they are the exact same type of cells. It's just depending on where they are located. It's a really good quiz question, so make sure you have them separate. Remember, Schwann cells are found in the peripheral nervous system. Oligodendrocytes are found in the central nervous system. Okay, they have the same function, and that function is to insulate and protect the neuron. All right, we're going to get to what that insulation does in a moment. If you look at this image over here, you can actually see that the Inner part of this is the actual Schwann cell. There's the nucleus, Schwann cell number 3 nucleus, and then the axons are going to essentially be of all of the nerves that are running through that. So the Schwann cells kind of bundle all of them together. On this central image, you can see that the Schwann cell kind of wraps itself multiple times around of that axon, and it's going to protect and insulate that neuron. Okay. The axons that are insulated by Schwann cells or oligodendrocytes essentially are insulated for a reason. All right, a really good metaphor here to understand this is that if you're driving down the road and you see the insulated power lines that kind of follow the highway, power lines have a plastic or rubber coat around them. And that's to make sure that, first and foremost, the power lines don't crisscross and touch each other. Because if they do, that flow of power is going to be disrupted. It's going to impact each other, and we might have like a power shortage or a power arc. So we need to make sure that we insulate them so they don't connect and get crossed. The other reason we need to insulate them is so that other things other than power lines don't accidentally connect with them. So maybe a tree branch or a little tiny squirrel running across it. We need to make sure that outside things don't touch that power line. Similarly, in our nervous system, we insulate our axons so that one neuron will not impact or communicate or disrupt another neuron, so they don't cross wire. They also want to insulate so that other cells around them will not accidentally interact with that signal that they're sending. Okay. The third function that is unique to just the nervous system is that insulation actually helps conduct the signal from the neuron faster. Each of the different Schwann or oligodendrocytes that wrap around the neuron leave a little tiny gap between them. So if you guys see the purple cells that are wrapping around them, those are the neurons that are myelinated, meaning they have that oligodendrocyte or that Schwann cell around them. And in between them are these little gaps called the nodes of Ranvier, right? The nodes of Ranvier are little gaps where the neuron is exposed, and that's going to be very, very important. Keep a note that there are a lot of diseases that are caused with the damage to those myelination sheets, those myelinated sheets. So that damage can sometimes lead to some conditions. And we're going to talk about a couple of them later on in this lecture. Okay. So if we look at those myelin sheets, we can see them here and here and here. This image shows us all of those different cells that we just saw. So let's take a moment, see if you can find a neuron in this image. Good. So you should see right here is that cell body in the center of our cell. It's kind of orangey with a pinky nucleus. And we can see that there's an axon coming out from that neuron. Pause and see if you can find one of those microglial cells. Micro means small. You see small cells that would be supporting our axon, supporting our neuron. Good. Letter A shows our microglial cells, a bunch of those support cells that are going to help us protect our neuron with our immune function. Pause and see if you can find the astrocyte. Good. If you found the astrocyte labeled letter C, there's our astrocyte that's going to connect our capillary or our blood vessel to our neuron. It's going to help protect it and make sure that nothing bad gets into our neuron and only good gets into our neuron. Lastly, see if you can find the oligodendrocyte in this image. Good. You should see letter B is showing the oligodendrocyte wrapping itself around that axon and myelinating that axon. Notice this is an oligodendrocyte, so quick quiz. Would this image be taken from the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system? If you said central nervous system, you're correct. If this image was taken in the peripheral nervous system, it would be not an oligodendrocyte. It would be called a Schwann cell. Nice. Okay. Take a moment really quick to see if you can label all of these. Pause the video now and then we'll go over it in a moment. Awesome. So if you already labeled your neuron, let's go through it together. Starting not in order, we're going to start at the center of this structure here. Number 2 would be the nucleus. All right, the nucleus. All right, this is of course a neuron, so this would be the nucleus of that. Number 3 should be the cell body. So this is going to be where all of the operations of that cell are actually taking place. Number 1 should be the dendrite. So those are the appendages that come off of the cell body that are going to receive that information. Number 4 should be the either oligodendrocyte, the Schwann cell. Either of those would be correct because we don't know if this neuron is in our peripheral or our central nervous system. You also perhaps could label that as a myelin sheath, which is what the oligodendrocyte and the Schwann cell are actually providing. They're providing that myelination. Number 5 should be labeled the axon. So that's going to be that long strand that goes from the cell body to the end. And number 6 has a couple different terms you could label it as. You could say that's our axon terminal, meaning the end of the axon. You could say that it is our synaptic terminal, meaning that's where it's going to synapse with another neuron. You could say that it's a synaptic button, which I think is a pretty cute name, synaptic button. All right, a couple names you could have there. So nice job if you got all of those correct. All right. Essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be learning about the job that the neuron does. Okay, so we know all the structures. Let's talk about the function of those structures. How is this neuron able to send an impulse from one neuron to the next, right? This impulse is going to be an electrical impulse, right? The fun fact of this is that when we look at this neuron here, we have our myelin sheaths created by our Schwann cells. The myelin sheath is known as white matter. If you've ever seen white matter or gray matter, if you've heard that referenced before, white matter and gray matter essentially are going to be whether or not we're looking at myelinated areas or non-myelinated areas. And we'll go over that in just a moment in part 2.